Okay, great to have everybody on today, Saturday, June 19th, 2021. Great to have everybody on today for the next session of our Meet the Author series. We're going to talk about forgiveness, which you can see on your screen right there. There's my contact info for those people who are watching the recording and may be new to working with me. I know some of you have taken some of my other classes, so you know all that information there already, but there it is on your screen. Feel free to get in touch with me using any of the social media, etc. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and so forth. Okay, so we're going to talk about forgiveness today. And before I share with you just a couple of screens of slides in a minute, just give you a quick overview of what we're going to talk about and how we're going to approach this. So first of all, those of you who've worked with me before, you know about me that I am here to share ideas with people. That's what I do. And so if these ideas and perspectives and approaches today in terms of this conversation about forgiveness are helpful to you, great. And if it's not, if it doesn't fit with how you feel you think about forgiveness and it's worked for you, the way you think about it, that's okay. So I'm not here to change people's belief systems, even about forgiveness. But if the approach is helpful or some ideas you can pull out of what I'm sharing with you that will help promote your being more forgiving and so forth, and what's the goal, then that's great. And what's the goal? The goal is always to improve the quality of our lives, to help us live life more enjoyably. That's always the goal in all of my talks and all of my classes. So again, take what works, and if something doesn't fit exactly with how you think, that's okay. But feel free to bring up questions in the Q&A that we'll have at the end, those of you who are on live here. So we're going to talk about what forgiveness is, and we're going to start out talking about how forgiveness is viewed from a kind of a general view, looking at a Wikipedia definition that I pulled up, and how many people view forgiveness. I'm going to share with you how I think about it in a few minutes, but you know, I want you guys to think as we're talking today, or as I'm talking, and then we're discussing together in the Q&A, what kind of problems does it create for you, or what have you experienced when you cannot forgive? And again, we'll get into how I view forgiveness and the general definition in a second. But think about what happens when you don't forgive. You know, what are the repercussions? What have you experienced personally inside yourself, and then either maybe professionally or personally in relationships? Because remember, it's not always just a relationship under our home roof. It could be relationships in our workplace as well, and anywhere else. So you'll see that the way I think about it, and those of you who've read my book and the essay on page 54, we're going to reference it. The nuances of forgiveness, the essay I've written in here. We're going to reference that essay in a few minutes as we go through it. You'll see that I have maybe a little bit of a different approach to thinking about forgiveness than some people have. But let's start with this slide from Wikipedia. So that's the Wikipedia slide, which interestingly enough, I brought up, you know, I Googled it literally. I don't know, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday this week. And I don't think I'd ever looked at the Wikipedia, you know, page on forgiveness before Tuesday or Wednesday this week. Maybe I have, but, you know, years ago or something, but certainly not recently. And not when I wrote the essay several years ago either. And the reason I'm saying that to you is there's this one image on the first image on the page on the right is the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, which was I don't know, is it a coincidence? I thought it was very interesting because, as you guys know, who've read my book, I call the book Marcus Aurelius Updated. So Marcus Aurelius is on the forgiveness page in Wikipedia. Somebody put it there, obviously. I thought that was interesting. But we'll get into I'm going to reference the Wikipedia definition of forgiveness in a second. But this is a blow up of the image of Marcus Aurelius on that Wikipedia page and what it says underneath. So this is literally just a screenshot of that section of the page. That's all I did, was just did a mini screenshot of that section on the page there. And that is a bas relief, which means it's a piece of it was piece of an arch that was built in ancient Rome in the 2nd century. So what's that, 1900 years ago? And that's Marcus Aurelius on a horse coming back from some battles and so forth, fighting the Germanic tribes. But the point of this being on the forgiveness page on Wikipedia, evidently, is that Marcus Aurelius showed great clemency and forgiveness to the tribes. They called them tribes then, because remember, they weren't countries. Remember, this is 1900 years ago. There was no country called Germany. But the Germanic tribes and other tribes, he showed great clemency and forgiveness to their fighting against Rome. And he incorporated, one of the things about Marcus Aurelius's personality is his great forgiveness. There are other stories which I talk about in my afterlife class about his forgiveness towards his wife and so forth. But in this case, his forgiveness towards large, many tens and hundreds of thousands of people fighting against him and fighting against Rome, and showing great forgiveness to them and incorporating them into the fabric of the Roman Empire, which at the time he ruled about 1/4 of the world's population. 70 to 75 million people in the Roman Empire at the time, 1900 years ago, was about 1/4 of the world's population. But forgiveness, I thought that was interesting. Isn't that an interesting coincidence between the Wikipedia, whoever's selected the image on the Wikipedia page, right? So anyway, just wanted to share that little factoid that popped up in my awareness literally a few days ago when I first saw that. All right, so let's get into the discussion today about the general definition of forgiveness first, okay? So in the Wikipedia page that I just referenced, if you want to look at it later, feel free. But what I pulled out of that long page on forgiveness in Wikipedia is this short summary definition of forgiveness in the general way that most people view it. Forgiveness, in a psychological sense, is the intentional and voluntary process by which one who may initially feel victimized undergoes a change in feelings and attitude regarding a given offense and overcomes negative emotions such as resentment and vengeance. Okay, so that's the general view of forgiveness that's out there. So let's take a look at it in the way that I'm suggesting that we look at forgiveness in addition to that. So it's not a replacement of that. So just to be crystal clear, I'm not replacing that definition. I'm just giving another perspective of how to look at forgiveness. Okay, so before we get into that, let's just define love, okay? Because I think love is an important way to look and incorporate that concept into this idea of forgiveness, because very often, say in religious circles, for example, in spiritual circles, people talk about being a more loving person, and very often forgiving others is often stated outright in those religious and spiritual circles as the holy way or the spiritual way of being a giving, loving spiritual being. The idea of forgiving others fits in with all of that. And it's like it's considered good work or being a good person, to be a forgiving person. I think a common belief that people have out there, that I reference in my essay here, is people think that the idea of forgiveness implies that, you know, I think the common belief is that, you know, I'm okay with what you did. I'm not angry at you. I don't hold a grudge against you. And I think that's generally the way most people in lay person's language would articulate the idea of forgiveness. But I think it's a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more complicated than that simplified, distilled down version that way most people view forgiveness. And so coming back to this idea that very often in spiritual circles you hear about, oh, you're a loving person, I mean, you're forgiving, you're a loving person, then you need to forgive people for you know, their transgressions against you. That's very often a common phrase that's used. I think we need to talk about this idea of love, and we've talked about it. Those of you who didn't see or weren't here with us in the last session where we talked about love and unconditional love separately, you can go back and look at that recording, because the link is out there to you in the emails that I'm sending you guys. How do I define love? I use Jesus's definition of love that is not often cited, quite frankly, in spiritual circles, that I want to rekindle, which is his idea of love was accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. So what does that sound like in one word to most of you? It's probably, doesn't it distill down to that one word? Acceptance. That's how Jesus viewed the idea of love, as accepting the other person. And so if we look at, we view love through that lens, then it automatically moves us away from the judginess. You know, people use that phrase sometimes, being judgy. I think it's probably a word now in the dictionary. People use it so often. You know, his definition of love moves as acceptance, moves us away from that judginess of being judgy about somebody's internal motives. So we're drawing a distinction. What I want to do with you today is draw a distinction between the internal and the external, which I often do in many of my classes on many topics. And I think it's a really important distinction to make, and it's an important lens to look through when we're discussing various topics. And obviously today, forgiveness is to draw that distinction. We're not talking about judging a person's internal motives, because, you know, God forbid, I can't even figure out some of my internal motives sometimes. You know, we're all figuring ourselves out all the time, right? And if we can't figure ourselves out fully, how can we expect, how can we hold ourselves out to be some sort of judge, jury, and, you know, whatever, to other people's internal motives? So I suggest that, you know, we don't, it may be interesting in a cocktail party or just having a conversation with a friend. It's like, well, I wonder what they were really thinking. I'm not saying not to do that. I'm just saying, don't hang your happiness based on being right or wrong about that. You can conjecture, but it's like, just treat it like the same level you would treat a cocktail party conversation, you know, not something you're going to hold your happiness based on. So we got to move away from that internal judgment of other people and focus more on their external behavior. You know, what they did or said, how did it affect us? That, I think, is something that we can look at and then apply the judgment filter in that context. That to me is a much more effective way of increasing the possibility of our happiness in life. All right. So another aspect, the way I look at forgiveness in 2 words, is moving forward. So to me, the objective, let me say it to you this way. I agree with the Wikipedia definition of forgiveness. And then, we're talking about forgiveness as in incorporating this idea of love as acceptance. But I think that my overall objective when I am forgiving somebody is to move forward, in that relationship with that other person or people, because it could be one person, it could be a group of people, it could be a large group of people, the forgiveness is involved with, and or moving forward with my own life. That's primary, because we are the center of each of our own universes. And so our life, literally, our life revolves around each of us. Each universe is really circulating, operating, moving physically through our physical universe. There's billions, there's 8 billion of us human being universes moving ourselves through planet Earth right now, okay, the universe of planet Earth. So I think we need to look at ourselves through that lens, as individual universes with individual thoughts and emotions, etc., and desires and choices that we make. And that how can that universe, which is ourselves, move forward in its journey through this universe that we happen to be all living on here on planet Earth, the universe of planet Earth. So the idea of moving forward, those 2 ideas. Let's debunk and get rid of one total myth and misstatement and misunderstanding right away, right off the bat. And that's this idea of forgive and forget, okay? This idea of forgetting when somebody transgresses and does something inappropriate or bad or hurtful to you. This idea of forgetting is a complete myth. So get rid of that. This forgive and forget, it's a complete wrong statement. Nobody ever forgets, okay? I get what they mean, the essence of whoever came up with this hundreds of years ago, this phrase forgive and forget, whatever the source, the derivation of it was. The idea is let's move forward. But I like the idea of actually using English language that means what the English language means, because I seriously mean this. Those of you who've taken my meditation class, you've heard me more recently correct people's language that they use when they're talking about the meditation technique that I teach, because language means something, and meaning has an imprint, leaves an impression in our consciousness, and it can create false beliefs. And those false beliefs, if we use incorrect language, then those false beliefs can create false attitudes. And then what does that do? It makes our thinking incorrect, and then our behavior and the actions that we take are incorrect. And that leads to what? Suffering and unhappiness. So I'm all about correcting, and I'm not going to parse every word with people and so forth. But it's as long as you understand that you're using that forgive and forget, you're using that forget language, meaning to move forward, okay. But the problem is when you're using it with other people, are you explaining that every time? Probably not, So I suggest that if you're using that phrase with other people, that you not use forget, and talk about you're forgiving the person and moving forward with your life. That's how I prefer to linguistically language it, because that's really what that meant when people said forgive and forget. Because the reality is, if you say that to somebody, they may go, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to forgive the person because I'm never going to forget what they do. Well, that's true. You're never going to forget what they do. But so you see the problem using the word forgive and forget is that puts up a barrier to some people. And I've run into this in the past where they say, I'm not going to forgive. I'm never going to forgive that person because I can never forget the terrible thing that they did to me. Okay, I get it. You're not going to forget, but can we move forward? That's the issue. All right. That's the issue of the way I look at forgiveness. And I think that's overlooked. And it's a really important point. Okay. So let's talk about these 4 degrees of forgiveness that I talk about in my essay here. Let's talk a little bit about this. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of discussion about this idea of forgiveness. And a lot of you probably have examples that you want to share in the Q&A. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through these, but I do want to highlight these 4 approaches or 4 nuances, we'll call them. In the essay, in the book, I call the essay, I call it degrees of forgiveness, these 4 degrees of forgiveness. Okay. So the first one, just in summary, I'm not going to go through each one in great detail, but just to give a summary to launch us into the Q&A for our discussion today. The first degree of forgiveness is basically, I'll distill it down to, well, I'll read what it says here. Forgiveness as a simple acceptance of I'm sorry. So that's how I distilled it down here. But basically what it is a slip up in a relatively minor way, maybe even unintentional. So maybe the slip up was such a slip up that it was completely unintentional. They just said something stupid and it's like, oh, no, I'm sorry I said that. So you says like, yeah. So you say, yeah, it's no big deal. I forgive you. Let's move on, So that's a level of forgiveness that's very, very easy. Okay. That's, how you can discern these amongst these different 4 nuances that I'm talking about here, different degrees of forgiveness, is the intensity. What you just check inside. It's like an emotional self check. You check inside like, okay, do I feel it was intense? I don't know. So that's probably a first level one, first degree of forgiveness. It's very, very, very minor, not intense at all. Okay. The second degree, forgiveness as, in quotes, I accept what you did as an expression of who you were at that moment. It was bad, but I'm okay with it. All right. So this is a little bit more intense. So again, we're looking at what do we say? What did I say earlier in terms of Jesus's definition of love? We're looking at this in a loving way in terms of the definition of love as acceptance. So I'm accepting. See, forgiving is accepting whatever is going on there. You're accepting the person for who they are. Now, you may or may not accept their bad behavior, okay? But you're accepting them for who they are. Now, if that distinction is not clear, you need to bring that up in the Q&A because that's a really important distinction. What they did and who they are. Remember? Who they are inside, we need to separate these two. So we're accepting them for who they are, but not accepting their bad behavior because we're calling them out on it, right? We're saying, in this case, it was bad, all right? It ticked me off, but for whatever reason, I'm choosing to live with you. You're going to live with it, all right? I use my dad as an example. Those of you who have read my first book, this one, Overcoming the Fear of Death, I got a lot of stories in here about my mom, my dad, and other people and so forth, and then other people's stories in here too. But those of you who've read this book, you're already introduced to my dad. That's my point. So my dad a little bit. How my dad was a little bit gruff sometimes, and growing up, And I knocked heads with my dad, especially when my hormones started pumping, and whenever I was 10, 11 years old, however old I was, man, and, and then in my teenage years, there was a lot of screaming and yelling going on. Okay, let's just say that. But and did he hurt my feelings sometimes? And did I probably hurt his feelings sometimes? Yes. The short answer is yes on both. And but did we move on from that? Did we ever say, I forgive you? No, I never uttered those words to my dad. Okay. Until maybe after he died, I did. But, in my consciousness, I said that to him. But because then I realized, then much later, as a much older adult, I realized what forgiveness was. But in retrospect, I did forgive him when I started meditating, because I started realizing that all that knocking heads with him was my not accepting him. Okay, back to that definition of love that we talked about as acceptance. I was not accepting him. And what was I trying to do? I was trying to change my dad. I was trying to change my father. That's like changing like a stone into like some gaseous substance. It ain't going to happen very easily, and if at all. And so, my acceptance of my dad and who he was, including his some of his crazy behavioral traits, we'll leave it at that, that were very upsetting to me and others in my family at times. I accepted that. And so in that way, I forgave him and I moved on with my life with him. And we didn't knock heads in that same way anymore. So it was a very therapeutic, you could say, process that I went through that I didn't even articulate at the time as forgiveness, but it was. Okay. So for me, even in that intense state with my dad, it was a second degree level of forgiveness here. Okay. Third degree of forgiveness here. Forgiveness as stated in this way: I accept what you did as an expression of who you were at that moment, and I'm not okay with it. Okay, so the second degree was it was bad and I'm okay with it. This is the third degree, which is it was bad and I'm not okay with it. Okay, I am not okay with it. And so maybe somebody embarrassed you in front of your family or friends. Let's say they embarrassed you last night by criticizing you, what you said, and in front of this big group of 10 or 20 or 30 people or something like that. And it hurt your feelings, and it maybe even hurt your relationships, not just with the person who said this to you, criticized you. I'm just making this up as an example, but it hurt your relationship, maybe with business colleagues, and maybe there were clients in the room as well. I've actually been in situations like that with lawyers on sales meetings, what I would call sales meetings. They would call I'm just meeting with my client, but we're always trying to get new business. Back in my professional days, 20, 30 years ago, and I've seen lawyers embarrass their partners in front of clients of the other partner. It's just unbelievable. But the social skills, some people's social skills, they're not very developed, and their egocentric behavior may be overtaking them at times. But maybe it hurt their relationships. And so at that point, you're going to express that to that person afterwards, right? You're going to say, I'm not okay with your behavior. I am not okay with it. But let's talk about it now privately, maybe, right? See if we can work out, if this played out again in front of a client, let's figure out how to better articulate this. I had many meetings like that with my law firm partners, to try to get them all on the same page. I was like the mediator, amongst them, to try to get them to work better, play together in the sandbox better, so to speak, right? Because in that situation, they got to continue working together. It's not like, hey, I'm quitting the firm, I'm going to start my firm. Now, did that happen sometimes? Yeah, when it got really bad, that did happen sometimes in some isolated cases. But in generally speaking, they're going to stay working together. So how can we figure that out? See, that's the third degree of forgiveness here. Where you stay with the person or people who you're forgiving. You're accepting that expression of who they were there and their behavior, but you made it clear that it was not okay what they did. But you're sticking together. You're still staying together, either in the case that I gave you example for professional reasons, or maybe for personal reasons. You're in a relationship, you're in a marriage, and it's not okay what your husband or your wife or your partner just did. And you made it clear to them, but you continue to stay together. Maybe you're staying together because you really do love the person, and it was just a serious infraction that you needed to bring their attention to, but you're sticking together, okay? Because you love them, and you really do love them, and you do love each other. And in other words, it's a mutually beneficial relationship that you're feeding each other still in this loving relationship. Or maybe you stay together for children. People will stay together for various reasons. I know some people who stay together for tax reasons, and they're living in different parts of the house. It's not wouldn't be my choice, but there many people do that, especially in the United States, where the tax implications are significant. But to me, happiness is more about is more than just about money. But that's my personal opinion. And then the fourth degree here, I'm not okay with what you did. So again, what are we measuring this by? What I say earlier, what's the internal emotional intensity? This internal emotional intensity is really, really intense. Very high level of emotional intensity. And you say, see you later. Okay, I'm out of here. Either it's a professional relationship, I'm leaving the law firm, start my own firm, see you guys later, going on to a different job or whatever, or I'm leaving the relationship, we're getting a divorce. In some way, whether it's a marital relationship or a business relationship, a divorce happens, okay? A splitting up, in other words, okay? Or if it's a friendship, it could be a friendship, and you just say, see you later. It's no longer mutually beneficial for us to stay together. It just isn't. I've reached my limit, that's it. In other words, who they are and how they've expressed themselves in their words and their actions towards me has now reached the unacceptable level. And that's it. See you later. Okay? And so, presumably, you've had many private conversations with the person or the group of people about how to improve the relationships, and yet not enough change has happened from the other side. All right? And maybe you've had to change a little bit from your side. Maybe it's a give and take. And I'm not saying it's always a one-way street, but their lack of change has really indicated to you who they are inside. And you can't change them. We cannot change anybody. Only that person can change themselves. They need to accept that. And so we need to accept them for who they are. They need to accept and acknowledge and see who they are. And if they see the need for improvement, only they can do that. We cannot push or force that on anybody. Okay. So that's the fourth degree here of forgiveness here, which is the most intense emotionally inside. Okay. And so I would close and open up the Q&A by reading to you the last paragraph on page 58, if you're following along in the book here. And this is related to the fourth degree, this most intense degree, where we this nuance of forgiveness, the most intense degree of forgiveness, where we are choosing to move on. Okay. Moving on in this way would perhaps be a way to demonstrate not only our respect and love for ourselves, the ultimate in self-love, but also showing our maturity as a soul, living with and relating to other souls in our many and varied relationships throughout our lives. Think about that sentence. That sentence is not just talking about self-love. That sentence is capturing the idea of, yes, we need to demonstrate our own love for ourselves by walking away from somebody who's abusive to us in our relationship with them. Yes, that is definitely a demonstration of our love for ourselves. And we need to walk that talk. It's really easy and it's cheap talk. So many people out there in spiritual circles say, oh, you know, self-love, blah, blah. Okay, do you demonstrate that to yourself? Do you really live it? Are you living it in your life? Okay, but that's one part. That's the self-love part. But did you catch the second part? But also showing our maturity as a soul, living with and relating to other souls in our many and varied relationships throughout our lives. Okay, many and varied relationships. What is that pointing to? This maturity as our soul, living with and relating to other souls. What that's pointing to is the last sentence here. It's a demonstration to ourselves and to the world that nothing is perfect, nor does anything last forever. So moving on may be the appropriate and healthy thing to do. We need to demonstrate to ourselves first, and indirectly we're showing other people that, in fact, nothing is perfect. Even a relationship, look, just self-disclosure. Some of you know that I've been married before, and I loved my wives, but I loved my wives and I still love them in this acceptance way that Jesus has defined love, but I love them romantically as individuals. That's why I married them in the first place. So I think sometimes people who are in this fourth stage of forgiveness, we'll call it, or fourth degree of forgiveness, forget, especially if they're in a divorce situation, you know, what brought them together in the first place. There was something there. And maybe the other person wasn't revealing everything to you. That's possible. But in my case, I think that was less so and more so that we had grown differently. And growing differently as souls is a normal part of, to me, it's a normal part of our eternal journey, because we are each individual universes. That idea that I talked about at the beginning, individual universes, we're individual universes together. In a marital relationship, you have two individual universes together. And hopefully there's a lot that overlaps and mutually feeds and nurtures each other. And that's when you have a healthy marriage, a healthy relationship. Again, whether personal, professional, doesn't matter. But what do you do when it's not? And that's where forgiveness, these different stages or degrees, you could say, degrees of forgiveness come into play and are crucial. To me, for us to move forward, the nuances, thinking of forgiveness in these various ways, and not just thinking of it as a black and white, either forgive you or don't forgive you. I think these nuances, these subtleties of the way I'm suggesting in this essay that we look at forgiveness will increase the likelihood that we can forgive and move on. Even if we stay in the relationship, that we can move on from that specific event or instance of a need for forgiveness. Okay? Questions. Let's open up the questions. I'm going to take myself off of spotlight. Here we go. Questions, anybody? Comments, questions? Anybody want to share anything?
I have a comment, Kel.
Yes.
It's Elaine.
Yes.
I really like this. I really like this discussion. I'm really, I like what you said too. It's like you're discerning the behavior from the person themselves. And I think that's very important. Because the person themselves, I believe everybody is ultimately doing the best they can where they're at in the moment. The behavior may not be, you know, something that you can either you can deal with it at the time or you can't. But I think the big distinction is between the behavior and the person, which I think is very, very important.
Yeah.
And I think forgiveness is for me more than it is for the other person, which may be selfish. But I find that anger turns in resentment, and that hurts me more than it does the other person, because I find I'm a prisoner of that. It makes me a prisoner of actually that person, because I notice my emotions are wrapped around it. My mental energy is wrapped around it. So I feel like I'm a prisoner of something so forgiveness for me is actually accepting and letting go for myself. And it's not necessarily always for the other person, but I know what it feels like if I don't forgive, if that makes any sense.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Go ahead.
What's that saying? Resentment is like taking poison and expecting it to kill the other person, which is really, really true. And
Yeah.
I've experienced that in my life, holding on to things. And just from experience, and it's definitely a process. It's not something you just, you know, okay, it's definitely a process, and it definitely is a maturity.
Yes.
Just want you to know, I really appreciate the discussion today. I learned a lot. Thanks, Cal.
Yeah, thank you for what you just shared, because I took some notes here, because there's some key points that you raise in there, Elaine, that you shared with us, which are really important, and I want to underscore several of them. So let's work backwards. So, you know, holding on to resentment, as you said, Elaine, holding on to resentment. Well, first of all, just the overarching thing you said, it's definitely for us. It's definitely primarily for us, and secondarily for the other person when we forgive. Because ultimately, as I said, we are the center of our own universe, and that's not a bad thing. That's just reality. Okay, that's reality. We are the center of our lives. That's what I mean when I say our own universe. Who else is the center of our life? You're not the center of my life. I'm the center of my life. You know, we each are. And that's not a bad thing. That is just a statement of reality. It's a fact. And so, number one, we need to take care of ourselves first. And so forgiving absolutely benefits us primarily. No doubt, absolutely. That's the case. And sure, it can help the other person too. I'm not saying it can't, but it's primarily we do it for ourselves first. And this goes back to your point. You said, am I being selfish? No. Draw a distinction. Remember, there's an essay in here, there's several essays in here about self-interest and selfishness and how they're not the same thing. And that's a big mistake. And you got to get that out of your lexicon, your dictionary, Elaine. You need to put into your dictionary, I mean, everybody, this is really an important thing. I'm serious about this, to put this into your life dictionary, your dictionary about your life, that selfish and self-interest are not the same. We are all self-interested. And if we don't take meaning self-interested, meaning we're interested in taking care of ourselves, that's what self-interest means. Interested in taking care of ourselves. If we're not interested in taking care of ourselves, then we are derelict on a duty, on our own duty, on our own duty. All right? We're not taking care of ourselves. That's what self-interest means, is to take care of ourselves. So it's not, you see, taking care of ourselves, that's not the same as being selfish. They're two very different things. If you take the idea of self-interest too far and you're only thinking about yourself all the time, that's selfish, okay? Or maybe not all the time, but in a given instance, too much thinking of yourself and not thinking about, you know, the other person you just cut off in the intersection and almost cause an accident, or maybe did cause an accident, you know, that's being selfish, all right? It's in our self-interest to be careful driving through an intersection, all right? Because we are going to get to where we want to go fastest, quickest, and we are going to get there unscathed, all right? All right, so selfish is an extension, is too much being self-interested, too much, but self-interested is very important. It's neutral. So holding on to your resentment, and another point you said, holding on to your resentment can, you know, is not good. Not only that, it can create illness. You guys know I'm a health guy, teaching meditation. I know about the fight or flight response, both personally, privately. I know about it from my teenage years. That's why I learned to meditate in the first place, as you guys know, as many of you guys know. I was so high anxiety. So what if I did not learn to meditate, and I did not learn how to release the pressure valve, and I did not forgive my father in that example? So here's a little, I think I maybe alluded to this when I told you about this earlier in the session today. But you know, when my dad and I were going at each other, the milestone changing event for me was learning to meditate, because when I learned to meditate, it released the pressure valve within me that was, you know, it was my own stuff, you know, building up, and that he was just a trigger for. And so then I started I guess my mom told me later, like 3 months later, she said, you know, you start getting along better with your father since you learned this meditation thing. I said, what? What? I mean, I've gotten like, she says, yeah, you came back for Thanksgiving vacation, you came back for Christmas break. You guys didn't argue much. I was like, what? Really? I didn't even notice it. You know how that, you know, that expression, you're too close to it. You're too close to the situation, so you don't notice it. I didn't even notice. My mother noticed. I said, wow. But that was like a classic example of me. I learned to meditate. It helped me release the pressure inside, and I could deal with my dad's same behavior. It's not like his behavior changed. You know, I could deal with it better, but I did not hold in the resentment, to Elaine's point, because if I had, and I had not learned to meditate, I know myself, my physical body and my psycho-emotional, you know, they're all connected, just like yours are. Our mind, body, emotions are all connected. But me stuffing my emotions would have led to me physically down here in my stomach having stomach issues, because I know because in high school I started having stomach issues before I learned to meditate, you know. So holding on to resentment can cause illness. That's my point. All right. Holding on to resentment, not a good thing. And in Elaine's point of being angry, then you become a prisoner. She used that phrase. We become a prisoner to the anger. And that's not good, because to use my language that I use in my classes, what's that doing? It's limiting us. And what's happiness about? Again, what's the objective of this talk, all my classes, all my talks, is to increase our happiness, our contentment in life, to enjoy life more. Well, what does that mean? Mean more limited? More limited? No, it means being more expanded and more unlimited in terms of our possibilities and so forth. That brings about more happiness when we feel freer, when we feel less limited. Just look at this COVID thing. People are so unhappy. I think the media has focused on, you know, appropriately on other things, maybe the vaccine and so forth. But I think they're like, you know, excessively, focused on certain things to the detriment of the mental health, you could say, of the world population, because I think the world population, my experience, and the level of inquiries that I've been getting in terms of the anxiety levels that people have are seem to be higher to me than pre-pandemic. And you guys are all living out there in the world, across the world. We have people in the US on this call right now, in South Africa, UK, and so forth. It's like you could see it in your own neighborhoods around the world, right? Over the last year and a half since this pandemic, people are really feel limited. And that limited, oh, you got to stay in your house. Oh, you got to do this. Oh, you got to do that. Oh, you got to walk, stay 6 to 8 feet apart, whatever. All of that limiting creates unhappiness. And so forgiveness creates more freedom. Therefore, is one of the elements, the factors in our journey of creating more happiness in our lives. Okay, really good points, Elaine. Thank you for raising those points. Great points. Anything else? Anybody else wants to share?
Yeah. Hey, Kelvin.
Hey.
It's Deborah from California.
Yes, Deborah.
Hey, I just thought I'd kind of bring up a point. And we kind of chatted on text a little bit about it this last week.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why I want to bring it up, because I'm going to kind of guess that other people are going to listen to this video, and other people may have had maybe similar experiences to myself, whereas they don't like the word forgiveness. I actually grew up, I don't know when I started disliking that word very strongly, because I think it really meant that, when I was younger, I used to think that forgiveness meant, the other person is basically getting off scot-free. They did this really bad thing to you, and it hurts really. And, it's like when other people say forgive, well, what does that mean, So one of the things I evolved in my mind through my travels is, in my own mind, what I do is when people say the word forgive, I replace it with the idea of letting go of negative energies. And so, I just thought maybe that concept might be helpful for somebody out there in the world. And also, it's kind of interesting because I did reread your forgiveness essays again with it yesterday. And, I think this morning my idea was expanding not just to like other people, but just the world at large. Because like you were just talking about COVID, but there's all kinds of gunky stuff on this planet and in between people. And you could go nuts. A person could go absolutely nuts, listening to all of it, getting involved in all of it. And of course, people, if they want to get involved, they should. I mean, it's the people, I think everybody's got their own, for lack of a better term right now, calling or interests in life. But I just found that, replacing the word forgiveness in my mind with the idea of letting go of negative energy, that's been helpful.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah, it what Deborah is saying in terms of this letting go of negative energy, to me, is another way of those two words that I suggest that we think about forgiveness is moving forward. So we're moving forward. How do you move forward? You move forward by letting go. You have to let go of the past to move forward, right? And so what I'm suggesting in this essay are ways to express through the lens of these different degrees of forgiveness, express ourselves in these different ways. I am not okay with it, and let's talk about this. And then how do we move forward? So I gave you 4 different ways to move forward. And the last way is literally leaving the relationship completely. But yeah, I think it's another way of looking at it, Deborah, which is a good way of looking at it, is you're leaving the negative energy, the restrictive, the limiting. What I'm calling limiting is the same as what Deborah's talking about as negative energy, limits us, okay? Leaving that, letting go of that, and then moving forward. Okay, that's it. That's it. We're not saying, remember, we're not saying we're forgetting, and we're not giving the person a hall pass, like Deborah was saying, that she always felt uncomfortable thinking about this idea of forgiveness as giving people a hall pass. That's a mistake to me. That's a mistaken way. And for those people, that's why I said at the beginning in the introduction, I think a lot of people incorrectly, think, the second paragraph in the essay, they incorrectly think that it's, yeah, I'm okay with the bad stuff you did. I'm not angry at you, and I don't even hold a grudge against you. They think that that's what forgiveness is. Well, sometimes it might be, but that's, to me, that's only the first degree that I talk about. That's not all degrees of forgiveness. You can have other degrees of intensity of being pissed off and hurt, upset, whatever, with the other person or people. And as Deborah said, yeah, you can blow it up and call it globally, expand it and talk, maybe blow it up is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Expand it to globally, and think about it that way too, not personally. Think about it more communally, in terms of community and even world community, and forgive. You think about it from a political standpoint, and forgive and accept and move on. There's a lot of tribalism going on in the world these days. And the tribalism, whether it's political, economic, educational, religious tribalism, it's all based on fear. And when there's more fear in the world, or in a community, in a group, or whatever, then there's more hunkering down and getting tribal. Oh, I got to get with my people. Where are my people? But when you feel more secure within yourself and less fearful, you can go out and interact with all people. And so really, the goal that people will hear, you often hear them talk about, we need to be with all people. Everybody should have equal rights and all this all people kind of idea. That really comes from that person, from each person, starting within themselves and strengthening themselves within, so that then they don't feel intimidated by any of those people out there who are not like them. That is what's going to, that dissipation of fear from within, that increase of confidence from within, that's what is going to really give rise to, eventually can give rise down the road to this a more inclusionary society. So, but it comes from deep within, and part of this, to come back home to what we're talking about today, is a factor, a big factor of this is the forgiveness concept, and the letting go, accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were, and then deciding based on their external behavior, their actions, whether you can live with them or not, and how you're going to live with them or not. You're going to continue in that relationship or not continue in the relationship. Again, whether we're talking about individual or, in Deborah's more expanded view, world community, either way, how are we going to view that? All right. And what we also have to remember, it's very important to remember, is that, and I alluded to this in our discussion today, but I just want to bring it home again, is that we don't have control over the other person. We don't. We can influence them in our conversations that we have with the other person or people. Again, when I say person, it's just person or persons. We can influence, but we can never control, because each individual soul, each individual mind is a free will thinking mind. They make their own decisions. They make up their own minds. They make up their own decisions. They make their own choices. We can influence, but we can never control. And so we need to ease up. It took me a long time to learn that, quite frankly. This lifetime, it took me a long time. It took me a while to learn, many, many years to learn that with my dad. Okay, ease up. I don't have control. And as soon as I let up on the control pedal, if there was a pedal on the floor, and the gas pedal, the brake pedal, and the control pedal, I was at my heavy-footed on the control pedal with my dad. As soon as I eased up on that and released all hope or connection between my happiness and my control of his behavior, soon as I released that, my relaxation and my happiness level skyrocketed, and my relationship with him improved. That's the key, okay? My relationship with my father improved from that point onward, all right? Other points? Anything else before we?
I have one more thing, Kelvin.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that idea, that thing that people say, I forgive you, doesn't that seem a little bit like an oxymoron now, that term?
Well, what do you mean? How do you mean it? Depends how you mean it.
Okay, the way I mean it is that if forgiveness, okay, you have to excuse me, but I still have a hard time with that word. So letting go of negative energy, all right, is all about each one of ourselves, because we cannot let go of somebody else's negative. We cannot step into somebody else's body or mind and let go of their negative energy for them. They have to do that for themselves, right? So if we're letting go of or forgiving somebody, okay, I'll just bite the bullet here and use the word forgive. If we're forgiving somebody, it's really about us letting go of that negative energy and moving on so we have our happiness. And it seems to me that it's for us, it's not for the other person. In fact, I've actually heard that before too, that forgiving is not really about the other person, it's about the person who's doing the forgiving.
You're repeating what we said already.
I'm sorry.
No, well, I'm pointing this out to you because I think the reason you're doing this is because you're still not accepting what you're saying. You're saying the words, but the reason you're still having a problem with this, and you think it's an oxymoron, it's not an oxymoron based on what you just said. It's about you. It's not about the other person. There's a part of you, Deborah, who's still thinking that it's about the other person. That's why you're having trouble accepting this. See, because you're still thinking that it's about judging the other person. No, it's about acceptance of what they did accepting what they did as an expression of who they were at that moment.
No, but the term,
but listen,
the phrase.
Let me finish.
Oh, sorry.
You need to look at it's an expression of who they were at that moment. You're accepting that as an expression of who they were at that moment. You're not accepting their behavior as their bad behavior, Deborah. Those are two different things. I think you may still be confusing those. You see?
That's a possibility. I might have a light bulb moment at some other point in time then.
So think of the definition of love. So you've heard me say this so many times. You've heard me say this in other classes too. What's the definition of love that I'm using here?
Oh, you're using the one that Jesus taught, where you're accepting the person as they are, not how you want them to be.
Right. And so that's that. If we use that definition of love and as acceptance, that to me, that's really the only way we can really forgive the other person, because you're still hanging on to these old which I consider mythical beliefs about forgiveness, that you can forget about what the person did. That's a myth. That's a mistake. I think it's a misunderstanding. And so you got to get rid of that completely, right? All vestiges of that you get rid of. All we're saying is, what I'm suggesting is, we're accepting them for who they are, not trying to change them into somebody they're not. And then we're deciding whether I can live with this or not. That's forgiving. That's how we forgive. Those are the steps of forgiveness. It's not a one-step thing like mythically people think. That's a mistake how they think. They think, oh, you just forgive the person. I accept what you did. Okay, let's move on. No, you go through these step processes that I just have gone through with you guys today. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Listen to this recording again. I think it may be helpful. All right. Anything else? Okay, to sum up the steps, it's we accept, we look at love in the way Jesus defined love, accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. So now I'm accepting them for who they are. I'm not trying to change them into somebody else. All right. That's my attitude towards the other person. They're making their own decisions. Now, I'm not trying to change them into somebody else. All right. Then I look at their behavior, and the behavior that bothered me. There's got to be something that bothers me here. Otherwise, why are we talking about forgiving? Okay. So we don't care about what the actual behavior was. Whatever it was, fill in the blank. It bothered me. Then I assess how seriously it bothered me. And depending on how seriously, intensely, emotionally intensely it bothered me, then I decide where I am in the spectrum of the 4 degrees of these 4 nuances of forgiveness that I'm talking about today, okay, in that essay. And I decide based on that, what my next step is going to be. And if it's really a minor thing, then it's like, no big deal. Okay, let's move on. But if it's a more serious, more intense infraction and transgression of bad behavior on their part, we got to talk about this. And I got to let you know that I'm really not okay with that. And you have to have an explicit discussion about that, about the behavior. And then you decide, okay, it's not that intense emotionally. All right, I can live with you. And there are other factors you're looking at. Okay, you know, this factor and that factor, I really love you and so forth, but we needed to talk about that. And then the 3rd degree is it's really bad, and I'm really not okay with it. The second one was it's bad. It's bad, and I noticed it. I'm okay with it, and we're going to stay together. And then so the second one, you're not bothered by it, but you're okay with it. The third one, you're not okay with it. You're really not okay with it. And it's more intense degree of the second one. So you're just having more of a conversation, and you let the other person know that you're not okay with it. All right. Second one, you're okay with it. It's kind of minor, but you're okay with it, but it did bother you. Right. The first one didn't even bother you. The third one, you're really, really bothered by it, and you're really not okay with it. And that kind of behavior can't happen again. That's the third. If we're going to stay together, you're kind of putting them on notice almost in the third degree. All right. The fourth one is see you later, because you broke our covenant. You broke our agreement. We had the previous discussions about this, and you did it again and again and again, and I've had enough. That's the fourth. Okay. So that's still forgiveness, Deborah. The last one. You're forgiving the person by accepting who they are, and then you're walking away from them. But you're walking away free from, you're not in this blame game thing. You're not judging them as a bad person. That's the point that Elaine was underscoring initially. I'm drawing a distinction between judging the person internally and judging their behavior. We're judging behavior, not their internal state of consciousness, Deborah. So you can't mix the two. You got to separate those two. All right. So I hope that helps everybody. Great to have everybody on. Thank you for the interaction and discussion and so forth. And we will see you. What did I say? The next session, I put it on the in the chat box there for you guys. The next session, July 24th, Saturday. They're all going to be on Saturdays. Same time, 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 o'clock Eastern time. July 24th on cruelty and bullying. Why does cruelty and bullying exist? What can we do about it? So we're going to talk about that topic. We're going to really roll up our sleeves and get into that in a very detailed way. July 24th. Okay, so I'll send you an email. Those of you who are on the email list, if you're not on the email list and you see this recording, just shoot me a message on any of my websites. Go to kelvinchin.org, kelvinchin.org, or kelvinhenrychin.com. Go to either of those websites and send me an email in the contact page and send me your email address. Obviously, you will. And then I'll add you to the list. So then you'll get the recordings of each of these monthly sessions that we're doing. These are free sessions about all of these different topics that I'm pulling out from my new book. Okay, and the book, if you don't have the book yet, any online bookseller has it worldwide. It's available worldwide. It's being printed at different countries around the world are printing it, and it's available on Amazon, but also Barnes and Nobles, and there's I can't remember. There's several British bookstores that have it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And South Africa carries it. We know because Christina got it in South Africa. So around the world, Australia, et cetera, you can get that book. So we'll see you guys July 24th. Okay, take care now.